started, and we are trying to crank up the air conditioning. So I think we're at definitely at a mini heat wave. So my name is Lillian Kawasaki, and I'm the director here at the Water Replenishment District of Southern California, WRD. It's really my pleasure to introduce you, to welcome you today, and welcome you really on behalf of all of the board members. So let me begin by first introducing our president at WRD, Sergio Calderon. And also our treasurer, Albert Robles. We'll be joined by one of our other board members. We actually have 5 board members. And I get the pleasure of introducing you because I represent Division 3, and this is Lakewood area, and I also represent Long Beach and 6 other cities. And so if you're not quite sure, come see me. I'm happy to tell you if I represent you or not. So again, welcome to all of you. And we do have several officials in the office, in the audience that I'd like to introduce. And I apologize if I missed anybody. Of course, you're all very special. Thank you for being here. But let me just quickly begin with Norwalk Vice Mayor Kelly. Thank you. I learned something from one of the politicians. One which was make sure that whenever you take a picture, you hold onto the resolution so they can't Photoshop you out. The other is that let's go ahead and just give each person one clap so they'll conserve on our energy. So, Norwalk Council Member Leonard Shyrock. Metropolitan Water District Board Director and Three Valleys Board Director David De Jesus. Bartondale Water District President Bob Noonan and Director Howard. Okay, one for Bob, one for Al. Pico Water District Board Director Adrian Diaz. Upper San Gabriel Valley Municipal Water District Directors Ed Chavez and also Bill Robinson. Right. Down Unified School District Board Member Donald LaPlante. And then also from the Congressman Laura Richards' office, we looked with Laura Richardson's office, we have Deputy District Director Tim Lee. And then not an elected official, but someone that is such a great partner for us is Steve McGuinn, who is the Director of LA County Sanitation District. Okay, and again, if I forgot anyone, please let me know. We'll make sure to introduce you later. So thank you for joining us again with today's Capitol Report. And this is an inaugural event where we have invited legislators to come and join with us to tell you not only about water, but some of the interesting things that are happening in government. Now, I'd like to give you a little commercial because some of you are water people and you know a lot about WRD and others are do not. So let me just take a couple minutes. WRD, or Water Replenishment District in Southern California, is a regional groundwater management agency. So we were formed over 50 years ago and we serve 4 million people. So if you look on a population-wide basis, we serve more than 10% of the total state population here. We serve 43 cities and have about 420 square miles. And this is really represents this area as the urban core of LA. And people go, groundwater, what about groundwater? Well, the fact is that 40% of our total water supply that's used in this region is groundwater. So it's a very significant source. Some cities actually are 100% on groundwater. And so it's really WRD's job to make sure that we protect both the supply and the quality. And then when the groundwater gets used up, because there's always more that's taken out, it's naturally replenished, we make sure to replace that supply. And WRD has really come a long way. Back in 1962, we were the largest user of water that was imported by the Metropolitan Water District, or MET. And that means that water was coming all the way from Northern California to the Delta area, as well as east to Colorado. Well, here we are 16 years later, well, the past 16 years later, but in the past 16 years, we've actually implemented numerous projects, enough so that we've actually reduced our imported water demand by about water with on an annual basis for 250,000. So we've done a really good job really, all of you have done a very good job in helping us to reduce that imported water. And how have we done that? We've done it through conservation, we've done that through use of recycled water, stormwater capture, and also salted water. Many of you can are so important projects or just in your conservation projects. And why do we keep saying imported versus local? The fact is that local water, groundwater in particular, is much more reliable because it's here locally. It's much more cost efficient, and it also uses a lot less energy, generally a lot less greenhouse gas. You don't need to pump it all the way over to the Tehachapi from Northern California or across the way from the Colorado River. And we really can't quite pat ourselves on the back. We have a ways to go. So we have adopted our Water Independence Network program. So by the year 2015, we're completely self-reliant. We don't need to buy water from the Metropolitan Water District. But of course, in years like this year, where it's made available to us at a reasonable cost, we want to be cost efficient and reliable. We also I wanted to also mention that one of the things that we're so very fortunate in this area to have, because most areas don't have, is we have almost 500 million acre-feet of groundwater storage capacity. Now, just imagine, I'm not water people, what that means is right under our feet, we have 500 million acre-feet of free underground reservoir. So what we really need is we need to make sure that we have a predictable framework that allows WRD and all of our pumpers, like Dale Water and others, to make sure that we can capture the water, store it, and then use it kind of like a cannon. So we can store it underground when we've got days like today when the water is much more dry and we have the water available to us. So we also like to say that WRD and many of the other Southern California projects, our local projects here, are very much a part of the Bay Delta solution. So it isn't just a matter of doing Northern California, but it's so important in Southern California to also conserve and save the Bay Delta. And this is why Lieutenant Minute mentioned Congressman, because her support has been so critical to us in making sure we get the better investment. And we also, this is our inaugural event, because I mentioned the Capitol today is an inaugural. And so what is a series of forums where we want to invite our legislators. We're very pleased that our first one today is Congresswoman Linda Sanchez. Let me just very briefly give her a background on the Congresswoman. She has been a big advocate for working families. She also knows a lot about judiciary and also trade matters, some because of committees, but also the long history that she's had. She's represented the 39th Congressional District. So as today, who knows how many districts are 39th, she's represented it since 2003. She's broken many, many barriers in Congress. She was the first Latina to ever serve on the Judiciary Committee, and also on very powerful Ways and Means Committee. This is the one that has all the deals with taxes. Currently, she's the ranking member of the House Ethics Committee, and she was also on Veteran Affairs as well as the Judiciary Committee. So, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for letting me give you a WRD commercial, but we're really here to hear from our honored guest, which is Congresswoman Linda Sanchez. Thank you.
Well, good afternoon. I want to thank you for the warm welcome today, and tell you that it's really great to be here this morning for the first annual, hopefully it'll be an annual event, Capitol Report. Before I start, I want to thank the WRD board members that are here today. William Murray from Division 1, Robert Kaufman from Division 2, and Lily Kawasaki from Division 3. You're here today to hear the latest of what the federal government is doing to help address California's water challenges. And I don't have to tell you, you know that California is severely water challenged. Unfortunately, the short answer to that question, what is the federal government doing, is not enough. Water is perhaps one of the most important topics in our country today, and it also happens to be one of the most overlooked. Jacques Cousteau, a very famous oceanographer, told us that the water cycle and the life cycle are one. So as lawmakers, that's something that I try to keep in the back of my mind. We need to remember that with no water, there is no life. I was born and raised in Southern California, so I know what it means during those challenged years, what it means for Californians. And because of that background, I look at water issues with a much different eye than many of my colleagues do. I just came back from the East Coast where they are experiencing a tremendous amount of distress because of Hurricane Irene and the amount of rain that hurricane has dumped on the eastern seaboard. But the fact of the matter is, they don't struggle with water issues the way that we do here in Southern California. So as a legislator for years, I've tried to work with WRD to organize our efforts among local members of Congress to address the regional needs of increasing our local water supply and reducing stormwater pollution. Those are two goals that I've had paramount in the back of my mind since I was first elected to Congress. The plain truth is that we need clean drinking water today and environmental protections for our families and for future generations of our families. In the past Congresses, I have successfully secured millions of federal dollars to fund the study of the Los Angeles Basin watershed so that we can find a way to get Southern California more clean drinking water and be more self-sufficient. In 2007, the House of Representatives passed the bill that I introduced, the Southern California Water Augmentation Study Act, which was a big win for Southern California's environment and water supply. Very briefly, for those who are not familiar with the Water Augmentation Study, it was an innovative project in conjunction with the U.S. Bureau of Reclamation, and that study would develop systems to improve the local water supply and reduce ocean pollution at the same time. It's a local pilot project that I supported that would show how small changes in the way we build our communities can, in fact, reduce ocean pollution and improve the quality of our drinking water. It would be a very smart step towards making our region more self-sufficient and less dependent on drinking water sources from outside of the LA area. And I wish I could say that this bill became law, but the truth is that the Senate failed to put it on their agenda. Without Senate action, it didn't move forward. And that's why I said at the beginning of my remarks that not enough is being done at the federal level when it comes to water. We find ourselves in an interesting new age in the Congress right now. Right now there is a ban on earmarks from members of Congress submitting for congressionally directed spending. And because of that ban, we need to be more creative when it comes to securing federal funding for water projects because that avenue is simply not available to us now. And as Californians, we know the role that water development has played in our state. We also know what the scientists tell us. The planet is warming, our human activity is responsible for that, and the effects are already evident around us. Now I say that as though we all share that belief, but let me tell you, there are colleagues of mine that serve in the U.S. House of Representatives that tell me things like, oh, global warming, that's just a theory, there is no science to support that. So trust me, we still have quite a ways to go in terms of education. But I would hope that most sitting in this room today agree that this is a problem and it does affect our water supply. We need to develop water policy that is shaped by how we conserve this precious resource. So prices and policies must be set in ways that give everyone a clear incentive to use water efficiently and to avoid waste. I'd like to tell this story. It's just a personal observation of mine. But I grew up in Southern California. I'm very cognizant of water use, trying not to be wasteful. Here in California, when I brush my teeth, I turn off the faucet. I don't let the water run in the sink. My husband is from Connecticut. They have plenty of water in Connecticut. When he brushes his teeth, he leaves the water running, and it drives me crazy. And I've been on him about water conservation. Water conservation has never been an issue for me. But I try to use that by way of example. When you grow up knowing how precious that resource is, you act in ways subtly and sometimes that have been ingrained over years that are very different from how other people view the same resource. So we need to really incentivize using water efficiently and avoiding the wastefulness that sometimes goes along with water use. So regulations affecting water use in appliances and incentives to shift to irrigated lawns to water smart landscapes, like the landscapes I know that are outside of this building, are just two small examples of how small actions taken in collectively can really have an impact on how we can serve. Our government, I believe, has an obligation to help develop better water efficiency. And we can do this in many ways, but providing information, training, and in some cases economic assistance to farms and businesses so that they can shift to more efficient water practices is something I believe that the government can do and can do successfully. Lillian mentioned that last term in Congress I served on the very powerful Ways and Means Committee. That is the tax writing committee in the U.S. Congress. And all of the tax code is, ladies and gentlemen, is a series of incentives or disincentives to do certain things with the money. And by our policies, the policies that the federal government says, we can incentivize certain behaviors and we can disincentivize others. So when it comes to water use, there are ways in which we can cajole people to act a little more responsibly, or at least reward people for acting a little more responsibly. One of the pieces of legislation that I've worked on in the past is a bill that would create what we call the Water Star program, which is the equivalent of the Home Star Energy program. How many of you are familiar with the Home Star Energy program? I am, because my new washer and dryer that I bought had to be Energy Star appliance. Well, the idea behind the Water Star program is to reward communities and homeowners that make a concerted effort to protect and improve their communities in areas of surface water, groundwater, habitat, land use, or health. So it would be a rating system by which we could incentivize certain behaviors that are more responsible water use behaviors. And I'm hopeful that we might see this program actually implemented in the future. I'm going to continue to work so that more people in Washington understand the need to make smart investments now to protect our environment and our scarce water supply, not just in Southern California, but across the country. I don't know, but I would assume most of you are familiar with some of the really terrible wildfires that we've had in the last several years, particularly in the southeast region of the United States. These are unprecedented wildfires that are hard to combat. And the truth of the matter is, because much of the landscape is water starved, these are going to continue to be bigger problems in the future. So we need to think about smart water use, not just in our own little region in Southern California, because we know efficient water, but across the country, because it becomes an imperative for everybody across the country when we're facing things like epic wildfires that can happen, and how we preserve our environment and our landscape with these kinds of water challenges that we have. Although, we talk about water being scarce in Southern California, the sad truth is that there are people who think that it all evens out in the end, right? I don't know if you remember what things were like last year, but it was bone dry in California, and Californians were begging for water for agriculture and for other uses. And this year, the Metropolitan Water District in Southern California is selling surplus water to Southern California. And the big difference between the 2 years is simply that we have a significant amount of rain in between. And people think when it rains, everything's okay. But if you look over the long term at what our water needs are and how much rainfall we receive, clearly we aren't receiving enough rainfall to make that water supply a certain thing from now and into the future. We can't simply count on rainwater to solve our water problems, and that's why we have to develop new technologies, test out those technologies, find ways to reduce and recycle even more. And I really honestly believe that technology is one of those component parts that's going to be vital in protecting our water resources, because as we develop technology, we develop smarter ways of using water. So in a nutshell, I guess what I want you to take away from this luncheon is that I've worked very hard to carry that message to colleagues at the federal level. Again, many of whom have never had to confront the kinds of water challenges that we do in Southern California. And so it's a continual effort of education and advocacy to get our federal government to move in ways, again, that create incentives for people to be wiser with their water use, or disincentives for the type of wastefulness that we cannot afford going forward in the future to continue. With that, I just want to recognize two of the programs that WRD is doing. Their GRIP program and their WIN projects are both aimed at reducing our need to import water and our needs and making us more self-sufficient for the region. I think that they can hopefully, when fully implemented, help drought-proof our region and contribute to long-term solutions for California's water needs. So that's it in a nutshell. And if there are questions, I would be more than happy to try to answer any questions you may have. Yeah, there definitely needs to be that investment in the development of the technology that will carry us forward. And traditionally, there have been a number of ways to apply for funds for innovative, projects or research to try to help with the issue of water scarcity. With the traditional avenue of congressional earmarks now off the table, it just means you have to be that much more creative. And by the way, if you'll permit me, Lily, I'm going to stray just a little bit. And I'm going to ask this room full of very intelligent people who care about water, care about the future of this area. How many of you think that earmarks are bad? Can I get a show of hands of people who think that earmarks are bad?
Their earmarks are bad. It's our
That tends to be the case. I got one person. Can I ask this? Are there more than just Democrats or Republicans in this audience? There. Okay. Okay. All right. Good. It shows you earmarks are a nonpartisan issue, and I will say this: every earmark that I've ever requested, I can stand up here and defend to the death as something that would be beneficial to my communities. And I'm going to give you some examples. We got earmarks, I did in the past, for a really great pilot project up in Whittier, where we were going to have bioswales to capture and filter water. Number one, keeps it from running off the storm drains into the ocean. And number two, it helps replenish the water supply. Very innovative project because they were going to redevelop part and repave part of Whittier. Instead of just getting federal funding to repave something, we added a component to it which was water saving and pollution saving. And we were able to get the funding for that because it was this innovative project. And I've done that in several other regions of my district. Try to think about more than just the traditional, hey, we need to repave this road or we need to, retrofit this road. Thinking about ways in which it would be beneficial to the community from multiple standpoints. Okay. That's something that I could stand up here and defend to the death as something that is necessary and forward thinking for my communities. Here's a little something most people don't know. Earmarks, by cutting them out, don't cut money from our federal budget. Did you guys realize that? All an earmark is congressionally directed spending. That means that the spending that goes on in a particular agency, whether it's Department of Justice, whether it's Health and Human Services, all that earmarks do is give a member of Congress an ability to have input in funding certain projects in their area. If you take out that step and you say members can no longer submit earmarks, the money still gets spent by that agency. It's just the bureaucrats which decide how to spend it, rather than the people that are responsible for the area that they represent. So, this idea that earmarks are bad or wasteful or somehow that cutting earmarks completely is going to save us money at the federal level is simply not true. I would rather have say in how bureaucrats spend that money. We pay into the federal system here in the state of California. We pay in more money into the federal system than we ever get back in federal projects. So I would rather have say in how that money is spent, and I'd rather be able to advocate for projects like the Limesville and the Whittier than to say, oh yeah, all earmarks are bad and let's cut earmark funding as if magically somehow that's going to make a difference with our budget. So just information I wanted to get out there to you because I know people are fond of standing up and saying earmarks are lousy and they're bad and they're wasteful. And I will say this, there have been in the past, I will not deny wasteful earmark spending. Alaska Bridge to Nowhere ring a bell? But every single project that I submit is a project I believe in 110% and would be happy to stand up and defend. So just good for fun for now.
We aren't happy calling this capital today. So if there's questions that are not just water questions, we can live with our audience. That would be okay. Certainly encourage good opportunity.
Don LaPlante, I'm with Downey Unified School District. I've been a board member for many years. Where do you think we're heading with reauthorizing and fixing No Child Left Behind, that 3 years from now we'll have 99% of the schools in America classified as failing because of this one-size-fits-all approach that's there?
Yeah. I used to serve on the Ed and Labor Committee. Back then, we were working on the reauthorization for No Child Left Behind. That was 3 or more years ago. And you're talking to somebody who was a former teacher. My mother is a retired teacher. And I have talked to school administrators, teachers, parents. Everybody has identified some very serious problems with No Child Left Behind. And I guess the good or bad news is, depending on how you look at it, because there really isn't any ability to get it reauthorized right now. Secretary of Education Arnie Duncan has said that he will allow waivers for that requirement, particularly because we have identified a number of real big problems with No Child Left Behind. When it comes to testing of English language learners, for example, when it comes to schools who have made tremendous progress by working together and getting math and reading scores up, but they're still under the yearly AYP. To label those schools as failing is not an accurate description of what's going on in the schools. There are schools in my district that have had miraculous turnarounds, and yet they're going to be labeled failing schools. So the move to grant the waivers, as long as the states have their own criteria, is kind of a bold move. But in this era of not being able to fix what is truly wrong with that legislation and get it reauthorized in the way that it should be, that's sort of the the interim solution in my eyes. So I share your concern with the legislation. It's something that gives me a lot of heartburn, and that, you know, in city schools that are really trying hard and making tremendous improvements, you know, and about to be labeled failing, it's something that we really, really need to address. It's interesting that you mentioned that. Oh, I'm sorry. Somebody asked for the question. The question is essentially, what is Congress doing about job creation? It's a huge problem nationwide, but particularly here in California, is scarcity of jobs. And the response that I have for you is, although we are seeing signs of slight economic recovery in this country, it has not translated into jobs. And just because we are seeing slow economic growth, that doesn't mean that we're out of the woods or really on the path to economic prosperity again. Unless and until we create jobs, we are going to experience a sluggish economy, and that doesn't bode well in terms of global market and global competition. I can only speak on the Democratic side. We have introduced a spate of legislation called the Make It in America agenda. It is a number of bills put together that would do things like incentivize manufacturing in this country, increase exports, level the playing field between our country and other countries who don't follow trade agreements that we have passed with these countries. It would put U.S. companies on equal legal footing with foreign manufacturers, so that if foreign goods are imported that hurt or kill U.S. citizens, you would have the same legal recourse against those foreign-owned corporations as you do against U.S.-owned corporations. Bills that would beef up customs enforcement for either goods that are illegally or falsely marked in their country of origin, so they're skirting the duties and the taxes that they should be paying to import those into the country. It's an agenda of about 20 different separate bills, but taken jointly, if we could pass that, I think would do a lot towards helping get this economy back on track and creating jobs. Unfortunately, we have not gotten the ear of the Republican majority in the Congress when it comes to job creation legislation. Everything that we have talked about in the Congress in this term has been all about cuts. That's all the other side wants to talk about is cuts. They don't want to talk about increasing jobs. They don't want to talk about revenues or closing tax loopholes. They want to talk about where are we going to cut next. And then unfortunately, as we saw with the debt ceiling debate, everything prospectively going forward is set up to be another confrontation over continued cuts. That is all the other side is interested in doing, is cuts. I like to tell people that our national budget is no different than your monthly income or your household budget. When people sit down and they budget, all the budget is a list of priorities of your spending. So if you're like me, you sit down and you think about your mortgage payment or your rental payment, your utilities, groceries, gas to get you to and from work. When you're making your monthly household budget, you don't say to your spouse, well, we have to cut somewhere, so we're just going to cut everything by 50%. That doesn't make sense. You don't, you might sit down and think, well, we'll eat out less often, and maybe we'll grab back our lunch at work, or maybe, God forbid, we'll downgrade our cable package to just basic cable instead of having all these. But you don't look at each other and say, okay, well, we're going to cut, and we're not going to buy groceries anymore, so the kids are going to have to find somewhere else to get fed. That is the level of discourse we are having in Washington, D.C. right now about priorities, because we are talking to people who only want to cut. They don't want to prioritize what should not get cut and what is the legitimate fat that can be trimmed out of the budget. It is across the board cuts. We just want to cut everything. And that's not an intelligent way to run a household, and it's certainly not an intelligent way to run a country. So we, although jobs have been something that I worry about tremendously and have, advocated legislation to try to help create those jobs, particularly in the areas of new technology that are going to be sort of the renaissance, could potentially be the renaissance in manufacturing again in this country. There was a time in this country when we manufactured 25% of the world's solar panels. We now only manufacture about 10% of the world's solar panels. Who do you think the largest manufacturer of solar panels is in the world today? China. We are on the cusp of losing that industry forever. But with the right investments in technology, in research development, we can not only be a global leader again, but create the jobs that are going to get us into firmer economic footing. So, short answer, I guess it was a pretty long answer, is there's a whole agenda that I'm supportive of that we've been trying to get the other side to consider, and right now we are just hearing no.
With the global game, what is paying to black market what programs are in place that we consider motivate people not like sort of water
There aren't a whole lot that I'm specifically familiar with, although I know that there have been ongoing discussions about it. I really need to sort of do some research and see, specific programs. I know about the ones that I have championed at the federal level, and that some of my colleagues in the region have been working on. But like I said when we had the discussion about earmarks, many cities come to me with a list of, it's a wish list. Every year I sit down with my city mayors and the city managers and say, what is it that you're trying to accomplish in your city? How can I be helpful? And they'll have me a wish list. And some of them are very mundane. It's, filling in potholes or getting, streets repaved. But for forward-thinking members that can insert those unique things that meet our water challenges, they get noticed more in the appropriation process and more likely to be funded. Multiple benefits, it's not just actual repaving the street, but unique things that are going to conserve water and reduce pollution. But my goal in those kinds of projects is to show other cities that it's possible. Now, granted, typically costs a little bit more, but the reward or the benefit at the end of it can be 2- and 3-fold. The project of the Leader, which has undergone under construction, not complete yet, hopefully won't just be beneficial to Whittier, but might provoke other cities to think about adding those kinds of features. And again, small actions in the aggregate have tremendous changes. There's a part of Long Beach that is actually just up the road on Paramount Boulevard. They were going to repave those streets. We asked them to consider adding in bio-retention tree wells, which accomplishes the same thing. The City of Long Beach was on board with it. We got the federal funding for it. They just broke ground on it, and once that's in place, that's also going to be beneficial. So it's really also promoting the idea to others that this is possible, it's not exorbitantly expensive, and the benefits are multiple. So those are the types of things that I try to advocate to my colleagues. Yes.
What is the shape of the United District after they divide up in Long Beach? Are you going to see the election there or another district?
We have been holding off making any kinds of announcements until we knew what the districts would look like. The districts have been certified. We've heard that there is potentially going to be a challenge to the work that the redistricting committee has done. The new 39th, I don't know what that encompasses. A good chunk of the current 39th will be moved into what is we call the 38th congressional district. Other parts of the 39th have gone to other districts. And later this week, we'll be making an announcement on that specifically.
I had a question about cutting across the board in the federal budget. Military. what's the deal with that? We're the #1 spender in the world at $700 billion a year. China's #2 at a little over $100 billion. Lockheed Martin just dumped some planes for $325 million in the Pacific, which they can't seem to find. This is where the waste, $3.24 trillion in Iraq. When you talk about across the board, why is that the sacred cow?
You asked a question that I ask almost every single day that I'm in the Congress. Military spending has doubled and tripled over the last several terms in the Congress. It is the fastest area of growth in which we spend part of our money. And the question that you ask is exactly the one. If we're spending that much money, it would make sense to me if you think that in everything there is some degree of waste or fraud or abuse. But if that is the area of greatest increase in spending, probably the area of increase in waste, fraud, and abuse as well. And we got a little taste of that. The contractor subcontractor issue in Iraq, Blackwater to the world. For some reason, and I don't understand this either, when we talk about waste, fraud, and abuse in Congress and cuts, the military is always sacrosanct. It's the one area where nobody wants to talk about it, nobody wants to look at it, nobody wants to investigate it, nobody even wants to consider that there might be waste, fraud, and abuse there. And I believe that if we're going to talk seriously about cutting things like, Social Security or Medicare or children's health or education, we ought to be talking about where is the waste, fraud, and abuse in military spending, because I believe that there's some degree of it there. But for some reason, if you say something like that, hey, let's consider looking at where there might be waste, fraud, and abuse in our military spending, the first thing that you get called is unpatriotic.
Worse.
Or worse. Yeah. And, if you're going to be fair, if you're going to say across the board cuts, well, let's have the cuts everywhere so everybody feels the pain equally. But that is a question that I ask almost daily when I am back in Washington. To see why is that the one area where we're willing to turn a blind eye to whatever may be going on there? And I don't think that's healthy for this country.
Yeah, Congresswoman, you talked a lot about members from other states being realized what management's like in California. It seems often though that we're not even very united in California, to say the least. I'm curious what more we need to do, what can be done, particularly to educate our Central Valley members and others on kind of the more responsible water uses, storing more water, which they don't seem to be big fans of, water rights and entitlements and things like that.
You put your thumb on an excellent point. California has 53 members of Congress. That's 1/6 of all the total members of Congress. If the California delegation could act in a united way, there is a lot that we can get done. And unfortunately, we have a problem getting everybody, not even to agree, but to just sit down at the table to talk about it. The California delegation doesn't meet on a bipartisan basis. The Democratic California delegation meets, the Republican California delegation meets. We have invited members from the other side of the aisle to join us to discuss issues, particularly where there should be an ideological battle like water. We connected them to come. Members of the Texas delegation meet bipartisan. And for whatever ideological differences that they have, members from the Texas delegation are Texans first and Democrats and Republicans second when it comes to investments in their state. We don't get the same kind of buy-in from many members of our state, which is tragic. When you talk about areas that should be no-brainers, investment in education, the California State school system and the University of California system, that shouldn't be Republican or Democrat. We all recognize that an educated workforce is going to be the workforce of the future. It's going to be where employers want to locate because they've got a good pool of applicants. We don't have agreement on that. It's very tough, and so it is incumbent, I think, on, I wouldn't even say voters, citizens, regardless of where they live in California, to meet with their members or to call them or to write to them and tell them how important water is for the state, and to ask them to sit down and try to work with other members of the California delegation to come up with some semblance of a plan moving forward. We cannot afford to do things in a haphazard fashion going forward. There is just going to be too much competition for resources. We need to sit down in an adult way and put aside whatever it is we don't agree on, but come up with that middle ground where we do agree what's going to be best for California, and then kind of move that forward. And we can do it, members can do it, we can try. Joel, they lead, focus us down and talk about these issues. But ultimately the residents